Hey guys, it's your boy Wolf. Today I wanted to talk about something that's fresh on everyone's minds, and that is the NXT and TNA relationship. It's been a hot topic for a little bit, and we're trying to go to break down today a little bit on what the relationship's like, both from creative and from the business perspective. I'll avoid my usual, I think WWE owns a piece of TNA, and it just isn't being made known to the public. I still think they do. I'm just going to throw it out there. I still think they do. They don't own the majority, but they own enough to where they can make decisions and as they relate to how TNA operates. Um, with that said, let's dive into this because I want to try to make this as complete as I could possibly make it for myself with my own opinions and based on the facts that I was able to look up as we get into this. So let's start with the creative. Let's start with the most interesting thing. Let's start with what the most divisive topic is. I think we can all admit that creative has been completely one-sided against TNA. I think that's not a problem in admitting that. That's what most people online admit, and they're complaining about. I think for the most part, I'm okay with the creative decisions. Trick Williams as the world champion on Raw, even though it wasn't on actual Netflix portion, he was in front of the live crowd. They did air it, I think, on their social media. Uh, he's calling out The Undertaker. There's a graphic with the TNA world champion and The Undertaker in the same picture. I don't know, win or lose, like that is pretty amazing. Add to that, you had Joe Hendry. I get it. It was a 3 minute match. That was probably more people that saw the TNA World Championship in one night than sometimes in an entire year for them. And I'm going to talk more about that as we get into the business aspect of it. Um, the one thing that I really think about this, and I'm going to come back to this point a lot, is the WCW NWO feud. A lot of people really don't realize just how much NWO won from when it started. I think pretty much the month after, I think it was Hog Wild. I think it was the first one. I could be wrong, or Road Wild, Hog Wild. Hogan beat the Giant for the belt, and he held it for over 400 days. So that's about a year and year and a month and a half. So they dominated for at least that long. And then Luger won. He got a 5 day title reign, and then we went back to almost another 6 months of Hogan. So really putting it in perspective like that, just this was built around the WCW NWO feud was built on the NWO dominating WCW for as long as possible. I think really they're trying to do the same thing here with TNA and NXT. I think they're trying to avoid the pitfalls that the NWO WCW feud had, mostly building around the payoff. The payoff was supposed to be Sting beating Hogan. WCW finally came together, kumbaya together, and they all came to the ring at the end, held him up, on their shoulders as he held the WCW world title up. But the problem was obviously creative control, poor management, et cetera, et cetera. We can probably do a 2 hour episode just on my hatred, hatred of Sting and Hogan at Starrcade 97. We're going to avoid that for now, but I can tell you that was the turning point in the Monday Night Wars for me, where I pretty much said Sting didn't win. I was 12, I think, at the time, and I was just like, Sting didn't win. He lost. Like now WCW is pulling a NWO thing and they're screwing them over. So that kind of fell flat, but they have the potential to do something very special right now, and that is having a big payoff at Bound for Glory. Right now you have JC Jane as the NXT champion and the Knockouts champion. You have Trick Williams as the TNA World Champion. This is all reminiscent of the WCW NWO feud. We could potentially have this big payoff where it all comes to a head at Bound for Glory, where TNA makes this big comeback and they start getting their belts back. And all of a sudden, we got TNA now at a bigger position than they ever were. So I think for that, we're going to have I hope, TNA winning a lot and getting the payoff that they have been building to. If they don't do it at Bound for Glory, then I think it's pretty much going to be done. I think that pretty much is the end of it. TNA cannot recover creatively for it, at least not without a long-term restructure. But we'll have to see how this goes. But one thing I want to point out too is you can turn creative around so quickly. You can bring in a new booker. Well, they call them writers now, but you could bring in a new booker. You can change your style. You can change, a lot of things you can do is within your grasp. That's like something you can control. Look at AEW now in 2025. I mean, they made this big transition. I don't know if they got a new booker. I don't know, kind of what they did. I think Daniel or Brian Danielson is more involved, and I think that has done a lot to help make it more serious, to make stories have different layers. So I think like that just shows you that everyone was saying, "Oh my goodness, AEW is falling so far from grace. They're done. They're ruined. Blah blah blah." And now all of a sudden in 2025, they had their biggest American show ever. They're doing business like no other since they initially started, and so you can see how quickly that turned around. Business wise, it's a little different. So let's jump into the business aspect. Maybe it's because I've worked a lot of shows in my life, but the business side is way more important to me than creative. You can turn the creative around, but the business aspect, the financial sustainability of your promotion lends itself, it's paramount to your creative. You cannot have creative if you don't have the funds to operate the show. And so really you have to make sure that that is your priority. That is your best interest, is to make as much money as possible so you have that creative outlet in order to provide the best wrestling show possible. Back to WCW, the end of WCW wasn't bad at all. They got rid of Russo, they cut, a lot of the nonsense out. Hogan leaving was a good thing. They really started focusing on the younger guys. Scott Steiner got a push, Booker T got a push, Rey Mysterio was back in the thick of things. They were really focusing. They brought in AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels. Sting was, clean again and working hard again. They had just a lot of good stuff going on, but they couldn't dig themselves out of that financial hole to the point where AOL Time Warner just said they had enough. There's a lot of different stories about that. I'm not gonna like go into conspiracy theories regarding what really killed WCW. There's books on it, there's DVDs on it. You can infer your own opinion based on that. But the one thing that really brings me back to it, regardless of anything, was at one point, I believe they were up to $60 million in debt, or they lost $60 million in a year. You're not going to dig out of that hole no matter how good creative is. You can sell a bunch of merchandise, you can do a lot of good things, and it's still not going to matter. So, what I did for the business aspect of this, and I'm going to have a little graph that's like right up here, or probably up here on my other side, is I looked at the last year prior to the working agreement and then this year where it seems like the working agreement is at its strongest or where it's at its most noticeable. Pretty much last year, it was kind of off and on again. I think that it was more one of those things where they were testing it. In 2025 is really where they're all in. No pun intended on that, but they're all in on trying to make this the best possible outcome for both. So let's look at 2023 TNA and their attendance. Some of these were hard to find. Some of them I just kind of went with the max attendance of the building. I think it's pretty telling that in 2023 they weren't really giving out their attendance numbers. That kind of shows that it could be either way, good or bad. So take these, kind of as, I don't want to say a grain of salt, but take them for what they are. And most of them are just estimations. But let's look at 2023. Hard to Kill, 550. No Surrender, 1100. Sacrifice, 1500. Emergence, 1000. Under Siege, 1500. Against All Odds really broke the barrier when they drew 3,319. And then Slammiversary, 1500. That's for a total of 10,469 fans that attended their pay-per-views, premium live events, whatever they call it. I don't know what they call it as opposed to WWE premium live events. But that's an average of 1,496 fans. Not bad. That could be a lot better, probably way better than they did years prior to that. The years prior to that, they were starting to make an upswing. Scott Demore was doing great work. So let's look at 2025 now. Genesis 4,032, Sacrifice 3,500, Rebellion 4,500, Under Siege 1,500, Unbreakable 3,000, Against All Odds 4,000, Slammiversary 7,623. That's a total of 25,155 people, or the average 3,594. That's almost 2.5 times more people attending TNA events than they did the year prior to the working agreement with WWE, NXT, whatever. The final note to make about the business aspect is Carlos Silva has mentioned several times that they're looking for a major network to put TNA Impact on. And let's just be honest, if you're connected to WWE, you're going to at least probably get a meeting out of all of this. It doesn't, the networks don't care who's winning or who's losing. You can have TNA wrestlers job to NXT guys every single week. All they're going to look at is, where is the visibility of this promotion? Where is this being marketed? And if you have WWE in your back pocket, or if WWE has you in their back pocket, you're going to reap the benefits of that regardless. So a lot of people are going, well, this creative is going to make them suffer. It's really not. It's really not, because anytime you can go to any network and be like, hey, I have this idea for a wrestling TV show. And they're gonna be like, oh, okay, who's involved? And it's like, well, we're working with WWE to kind of get our ball rolling, kind of get us, to the next level. And they're going to go, wow, if WWE believes in you, we're at least going to listen to what you got to offer. And they probably have gotten offers for mid-level networks, but they really want to go big. They really think that they can draw 500,000 fans. I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think that's possible. But I think they're going to draw more than what they do now, which I think on access, again, there's not a lot of numbers out there anymore. The one place that used to be really good at tracking TV ratings and all that went out of print or whatever. It doesn't exist anymore. That's what I wanted to say. So I had to kind of piece together a bunch of information, and about the average right now is about 120,000 viewers, which obviously is a far third from AEW and WWE. But let's say they do get a major network based off of this. I think that's what Carlos Silva is looking at. He's looking at the attendance numbers that I just mentioned right now, and he's looking at the fact that he's getting a lot of meetings with a lot of networks regarding a potential major TV deal, which we saw, even as creative wasn't very good during the Hogan Bischoff era. I would contend that it got really good with the aces and eights, and the ratings and attendance also shows that to be true. I just think that this is the end game. This is what they're looking at. Is they're looking at, how can we be more financially stable? How can we prepare ourselves with a budget that can bring us 5 years of operation, or 10 years out of operation? TNA's always been pretty much like a year to year kind of thing. They were losing money hand over fist when the Jarretts started it. That's why they sold it to Dixie. Dixie, they had kind of that infinite number. A lot of people compared Tony Khan to her when they first started because of, the money, where it came from, the parents having the real money, and, this kind of being a vanity project. That kind of works the same way. Tony Khan was able to get his head out of his own ass and not be, well, he was a mark for that in the boys, but Dixie kind of didn't have the acumen that he does. So he was able to kind of get over that. And Dixie kind of was her own worst enemy. There's a lot of stories out there, how Paramount or Spike TV at the time wanted to buy TNA to make it kind of like what Bellator was as well, where they, kind of had the mixed martial arts, the real sport, and then they had pro wrestling, which was, the dramatic sports entertainment wrestling. And Dixie basically was like, no, I'm not willing to sell out. And then eventually she had to sell out for pretty much nothing. Again, that just shows how the business aspect, how big a factor it is, because after that, they kind of went really, really dark. Like they lost like their TV deal. They had some like minor TV deal that they ended up losing that as well. Then they got some other like they just kind of have gone into cycles. And the only reason they're on any TV now is because the owners of the company own the network they're also on as well. So I just want you guys to realize that there's more to this than just winning and losing. I always try to say like wins and losses matter up to a point, but at the end of the day, you're here to create a business, you're here to sustain a business, you're here to make sure that the business thrives. And that's what Carlos Silva's doing, and he's looking past what the booking is, and he's looking at the numbers, he's looking at the statistics, and he's going, this is working for us. So let's get into my final thoughts. I kind of breezed through all of this. I kind of am rushing through it, but I want to make sure that we have an understanding. And this is kind of like more of what my opinion is, and I already have said it throughout this. You want a company that's stable financially, and sometimes you have to do things that you don't really want to do, but you need to do them for the sake of security. TNA looks inferior now, but in one event, it can all turn around. I feel we've come to the apex of the relationship, and Bound for Glory will be the point of no return for TNA. It is their Starrcade 1997, and they can capitalize on it and have that massive payoff with whomever they put against Trick Williams for the TNA World Title. I don't know who it's going to be. I can't really think about who might be. I'm thinking Santana off the top of my head. I think he's still got a lot more play, and he's not going to end up, at least not yet, into NXT or WWE like Joe Hendry is. I think Joe Hendry's kind of run his course. They're slowly kind of phasing him out into where he'll go to NXT specifically. They could even do something tremendous as him turn heel against TNA and join NXT that way. I think that would be phenomenal. But it might kill his mystique because he's so over right now and he's so worldwide that, and that again comes from the WWE agreement, because more eyes were on him and it immediately took off. But that I digressed from my main point. They could use Bound for Glory as the massive payoff. I have a feeling AJ Styles will take on Kazarian. I don't know who will take on JC Jane for the Knockouts title. But what they're going to do, it might be Indy Hartwell. That might be a good choice just because of her being a former WWE NXT person. It might be one of those, kind of reverse like what I said with Joe Hendry, where she leaves WWE, she finds her home in TNA, and she's willing to defend hell and earth to get the TNA Knockouts title back to TNA. That would be a great story to tell as well. But this promotion can immediately nosedive and never recover if they don't put their foot down and say that Bound for Glory needs to be the TNA explosion, no pun intended again, where they finally overcome NXT and they have that big payoff. It would be great if they did that and also kind of brought out a network deal. I think that would be tremendous. Like that would be the best case scenario for TNA in this, but I'm willing to say easily that TNA has benefited more. They've benefited more than NXT for sure. NXT is I guess, a lot of clout. They're winning matches on camera, on screen, but NXT or TNA, excuse me, is reaping the benefits of all this financially. We thought it's TNA never dies. I don't know if like what happens, but they will somehow deal with this and overcome. They always have. So I'm interested to see what this does, because I feel like, and I used to always say, my friends used to always say, TNA done TNA'd again. This is the potential for them to TNA again. But will they look past it and actually do something right? Will they put their foot down? Will they be able to work with WWE NXT into getting something that's beneficial to them in terms of more than just the financial stability? Who knows? But that's where I'm most interested, is to see between now and Bound for Glory what the buildup is, who's going to challenge for these titles, who's going to win them. I think Bound for Glory is exactly where we're at. It's their WrestleMania, and I think it's great that this has kind of been built up, slow burn up to this point. You know, as mentioned with the NWO angle, they lost so WCW lost so much that people just don't even realize it. They don't remember that pretty much every single week a WCW guy lost to an NWO guy, or they were beat up or something. Like WCW was made to look like absolute chumps. They were made to look like garbage. And yet somehow they built it all back up with one person, Sting, and then they screwed it all up. So right now, TNA can use this time to build one person up. I know it's not a year and a half like Sting was, but a lot of people now have short attention spans. 16 months wouldn't work. But the next couple months definitely could work where they can build up a local talent, more local homegrown talent, more to be the true threat to Trick Williams. So I will say, up to this point, TNA has looked far better than WCW did during that NWO feud. If you look comparison side by side, in terms of the creative, you can definitely see TNA has been getting some wins. It's mostly on TV when they lose at the big events, but still they're getting more wins than WCW ever got on NWO. And then after the whole Starrcade 97, it just all went to hell so fast. So I'm interested to see what the end game is here. I think we have the potential of putting TNA into the next echelon of wrestling promotions. I don't, it's hard for me to say that they're a definite number three, but I think if the payoff is strong for this, they will be. So on that note, as always, that's all there is. There isn't any more. Talk to you soon, guys.